Assalamu alaikum students, this is your instructor Muhammad Umar Khatak for the course Organizational Theory and Behavior. This is our 10th lecture and we'll be starting chapter number 3 called Attitudes and Job Satisfaction. Learning Outcomes. After studying this chapter, you should be able to contrast the three components of an attitude, summarize the relationship between attitudes and behavior, compare and contrast the major job attitudes, define job satisfaction and show how it can be measured, summarize the main causes of job satisfaction, identify 4 employee responses to dissatisfaction, show whether job satisfaction is a relevant concept in countries other than the United States. Attitudes and job satisfaction. What is attitude? Attitudes are evaluative statements, either favorable or unfavorable, about objects, people, or events. They reflect how we feel about something. When I say I like my job, I'm expressing my attitude about work. Attitudes are complex. If you ask people about their attitude towards religion, Donald Trump, or the organization they work for, you may get a simple response. But the reason underlying the response are probably complex. In order to fully understand attitudes, we need to consider their fundamental properties or components. Teachers have assumed that attitudes have 3 basic components: cognition, affect, and behavior. Viewing attitudes as being made up of 3 components, cognition, affect, and behavior, is helpful in understanding their complexity and the potential relationship between attitudes and behavior. Keeping in mind that these components are closely related, and cognition and affect in particular are inseparable in many ways. Cognitive component. The aspect of an attitude that is the description of or belief in the way things are. The statement, "My pay is low," is a description. It is the cognitive component of an attitude. It sets the stage for a more critical part of an attitude. It's the affective component. The affect component. Affect is the emotional or feeling segment of an attitude. It is reflected in the statement, "I am angry over how little I am paid." Affect leads to behavioral outcomes. Behavioral component. The behavioral component of an attitude refers to an intention to behave in a certain way towards someone or something. To continue that example, I'm going to look for another job that pays better. This exhibit illustrates how the 3 components of an attitude are related. In this example, an employee didn't get a promotion he thought he deserved. A coworker got it instead. The employee's attitude towards his supervisor is illustrated as follows. The employee thought he deserved the promotion, cognition. The employee strongly dislikes his supervisor, affect. And the employee is looking for another job, behavior. As we previously noted, although we often think that cognition causes affect, which then causes behavior, in reality, these components are often difficult to separate. In organizations, attitudes are important for their behavioral component. If workers believe, for example, that supervisors, auditors, bosses, and time and motion engineers are all in conspiracy to make employees work harder for the same or less money, it makes sense to try to understand how these attitudes formed, their relationship to actual job behavior, and how they might be changed. Does behavior always follow from attitude? Early research assumed that attitude is causally related to behavior. That is, the attitude people hold determine what they do. Common sense, too, suggests a relationship. Isn't it logical that people watch television programs they like or that employees try to avoid assignments they find distasteful? The attitudes people hold determines what they do. However, in 1960s, this was challenged by a researcher, Leon Festinger. He argued that attitudes follow behavior. Did you ever notice how people change what they say so it doesn't contradict what they do? Perhaps a friend of yours has consistently argued that the quality of Suzuki Japanese cars isn't up to the standards of the imports and cannot be compared to the cars of German descent. But suddenly his dad gives him a Japanese car, and now there's no problem with a Japanese car, and suddenly Japanese cars aren't that bad. Festinger argued that these cases of attitude following behavior illustrate the effects of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. Any incompatibility between two or more attitudes or between attitude and behavior is called cognitive dissonance. Individuals seek to reduce this uncomfortable gap or dissonance to reach stability and consistency. Consistency is achieved by changing the attitudes, modifying the behaviors, or through rationalization. Research has generally concluded that people seek consistency among their attitudes and between their attitudes and their behavior. They do this by altering either their attitude or the behavior or by developing a rationalization for this discrepancy. Tobacco executives provide an example. How, you might wonder, do these people cope with the ongoing barrage of data linking cigarette smoking and negative health outcomes? They can deny that. Any clear causation between smoking and cancer, for instance, has been established. They can brainwash themselves by continually articulating the benefits of tobacco. They can acknowledge the negative consequences of smoking, but rationalize that people are going to smoke and that tobacco companies merely promote freedom of choice. They can accept the research evidence and begin actively working to make less dangerous cigarette, or at least reduce their availability to more vulnerable groups, such as teenagers. Or they can quit their job because their dissonance is too great. No individual, of course, can completely avoid dissonance. Desire to reduce dissonance depends upon importance of elements creating it, degree of individual influence he/she has over the elements, rewards involved in dissonance. While Festinger questioned the attitude-behavior relationship by arguing that in many cases attitudes follow behavior, other researchers asked whether there was any relationship at all. More recent research shows that attitudes predict future behavior and confirmed Festinger's original belief that some certain moderating variables can strengthen the link. Moderating variables. The most powerful moderators of the attitude-behavior relationship are importance of the attitude, correspondence to behavior, accessibility, existence of social pressures, personal and direct experience of the attitude. Important attitudes reflect fundamental values, self-interest, or identification with individuals or groups that a person values. Attitudes that individuals consider important tend to show a strong relationship to behavior. The more closely the attitude and the behavior are matched or correspond, the stronger the relationship. Specific attitudes tend to predict specific behaviors, whereas general attitude tend to best predict general behaviors. For instance, asking someone specifically about her intention to stay with an organization for the next 6 months is likely to better predict turnover for that person than if you ask her how satisfied she was with her job overall. On the other hand, overall job satisfaction would be better predict a general behavior such as whether the individual was engaged in her work or motivated to contribute to her organization. Attitudes we remember easily are more likely to predict our behavior. Interestingly, you're more likely to remember attitudes you frequently express. So the more you talk about your attitude on a subject, the more you are likely to remember it, and the more likely it is to shape your behavior. Discrepancies between attitudes and behavior are more likely to occur when the social pressures to become or behave in a certain way holds exceptional power. This situation tends to characterize behavior in organizations. It may explain why an employee who holds strong anti-union attitudes attends pro-union organizing meetings, or why tobacco executives who are not smokers themselves and who tend to believe the research linking smoking and cancer don't actively discourage others from smoking in their offices. Finally, the attitude-behavior relationship is likely to be much stronger if an attitude refers to something with which the individual has direct personal experience. Asking college students with no significant work experience how they would respond to working for an authoritarian supervisor is far less likely to predict actual behavior than asking that same question of employees who have actually worked for such an individual. This is the end. Thank you.